welcome to our show today. My name is Cindy Speaker, and I have with me today Attorney David Daggett of Daggett Schuler Attorneys at Law. David, how are you
Good,
today?
good, Cindy. It's great to be with you.
Great to be with you too,
I think
as
winter's on
always.
its way.
What's that?
I think winter's on its way.
Yes, I think you're right about that, sadly. And I hear everything saying it's going to be a tough winter. So I'm not thrilled about that.
Yeah, well, we'll get through it.
Yeah, we'll get through it. Well, we have a really interesting discussion today. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on it, especially from a legal perspective.
Yeah, the
But
the
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 birds have
birds have
landed.
the birds have landed,
I stole your line.
and
That's
and
good. We thought of the same thing.
they have flocked in Winston-Salem,
Oh my
and
word.
so have the Canadian geese. They've stopped over for on the flight down for the winter. So the birds are everywhere.
Oh my
Yes,
goodness. Well, tell
yes.
us a little bit about this. I haven't seen them at all other than in the videos.
Yes, yeah. So, real briefly, the birds are scooters that are operated with an app. It's a company out of California, I think Santa Monica, and it's a new wave that's kind of spreading across the country. It's kind of a cool thing,
Yeah.
but communities, cities, states are trying to figure out how to deal with them.
Yeah.
So here in Winston-Salem, I'm not sure how many. I would say hundreds, but that might be too many. But certainly there's at least 100 bird scooters that showed up in Winston-Salem overnight. They showed
Wow.
up in Greensboro overnight, and they're on street corners. People get the app, they come up to them, they're unlocked with the app. The app charges them. It's almost like your personal little Uber in a scooter. Um,
That's something.
it's really something, and quite frankly, the technology of all of it is pretty cool. And they also have a service deal, uh, so they have contract service people who pick them up and charge them at night and put them back.
Oh
But
wow.
they have GPS tracking, so the company knows who picked up which ones and how many, and the automation of it is really, I think, quite a study in and of itself.
That's incredible. So does that mean that the individual that rides it does not need to take it back to where they picked it up?
No, they just drop it to wherever they're going.
Okay,
So
so
so in big
okay.
cities,
Yeah.
there's some some real benefits. I was in Raleigh earlier this week on business, and Raleigh has a whole lot more bike lanes
Yeah.
than we have here. And it was interesting to me to see the number of people riding the birds in the bike lanes. And I stopped one guy and asked him, he said, "Oh, it's the greatest thing in the world because, with the state government there and, the Supreme Court and the Court of Appeals and, the Attorney General's office, that there's always documents and packages and papers that with short deliveries, but
Yeah.
beyond just an easy walk. Now they just walk out the door, use their app, jump on the bird, take it to where they're going, deliver their package, uh, maybe stay there, maybe take the bird
Yeah.
somewhere else or another bird, and they're
Wow.
left everywhere.
That's
And,
amazing.
and they said the ease of traffic of getting around, particularly in a big city and not having to worry about parking and all that sort of thing, is really a valuable asset to the community.
Okay. Well, it all sounds great, but I would imagine there's some significant safety issues here.
Yeah, yeah. There's the flip side of the birds, and there's a when we were growing up, we always talked about the generation gap. Do they still
Yeah.
talk? Yeah, Catherine's nodding her head and pointing at me.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
yeah, and there's a generation gap. So what I always say: the people older than me are the old folks, and the people younger than me are the young folks. And I'm the perfect middle. So
Right.
so for the older folks, the birds can be a little bit irritating. They're parked around haphazardly, blocking sidewalks. You don't necessarily know how they're operating and how to navigate with them and all those sort of things. For particularly the millennials, you know, this is a cool sort of
Yeah.
everyday sort of thing, and they can just use that and ride around. And it's a little bit in my mind, and I was thinking about this. It's a little bit like when we went from the horse and buggy to cars.
Yeah.
Everybody knew how to deal with cars or with horse and buggy.
Yeah.
They knew how to park the horse, and they knew, you know, but they didn't know what to do with cars or where they
Yeah.
were supposed to go. And what we had to do as a society is we had to adapt ourselves and figure out how the bird, because I mean it's obviously got popularity and
Yeah.
it's obviously spreading through the country, so it's gonna happen. So
Yeah.
we have to figure out a way to deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what about liability issues if there's any kind of an incident or an accident?
Well, that there's all sorts of crazy things to be worked out in that
Yeah.
regard. So, well, and let me back up a little bit.
Okay.
The Institute of Government has actually issued a paper, an opinion paper, and it's that one person's opinion, but it's coming out of the Institute of Government on, you know, is the bird a vehicle or not?
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, you
Yeah.
know, and so and that's important for, you know, age restrictions on
Sure.
driving them, on whether they're subject to traffic laws, whether they're subject to DWIs, you know, all sorts of things like that. But and it's a little bit funny. So if you go to the Bird app, the one of the things that you have to do on there is you have to sign a waiver that you agree to everything. Well, and it's all done on a smartphone. Well, nobody's going to read a long waiver on a smartphone. I
Right.
mean, it just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But part of that waiver is you have to be 18 years old. Well, I'm seeing people on them who aren't 18 years
Who's
old.
going to check?
You know, who's going to check? Second is they require you to you're supposed to have a helmet. Well, I've seen a lot of people riding birds. I've never seen a single one wearing a helmet because,
Wow.
as a practical matter, you, me, I mean, I'm a helmet fanatic with
Right.
bicycling, but I don't walk around town with a helmet under my arm
Right.
just in case I'm going to jump on a bird. I mean, it's ridiculous and doesn't make any sense.
David, hold
Um,
on a second. I'm just sitting here thinking, can you imagine our grandparents overhearing this
oh,
conversation?
yeah, well, that and the, you know, a phone that you can carry. You know, yeah, yeah. So in that, you know, in a way, that's what the legal system does, is it sorts out these
Yeah.
issues and it figures out how we're going to deal with them. Now, it's interesting in North Carolina, and you know, this is breaking real fast,
Yeah.
but Asheville and Greensboro, right here, they have both banned birds.
Oh,
And, you know, they've said, you know, pick them up and get them out of here, or we're going to pick them up and impound them.
okay.
Uh, Raleigh, uh, the council there debated the issue, and they said, no, we're going to allow them while we try to figure out what regulations we're going to put in place. Um, in Winston-Salem, I went running at lunch, and they're still all over town, even though it's 34 degrees and raining. So, so, but what I'm trying to demonstrate is that our, you know, the legal system is how we govern ourselves
Yes.
in daily activities. We take a lot of that for granted,
Yeah.
but places where there isn't a legal system, they don't have some of the basic morality
Yeah.
that we have just with regard to other people's property and
Yeah.
liberties and those sorts of things. Well, with the bird, we're going to have to sort that out and figure that out. Cities are going to have to figure out, you know, they're not allowed on sidewalks. They're only allowed in streets. But if they're allowed in the streets, do you have to have a helmet? Bird says 18. The driving limit is 16. You know, where do you park them? It's kind of irritating when you're downtown and you have to walk around birds that are parked on the sidewalk. where can and can't you? I
Yeah,
know it's funny, but
it's kind of funny.
but society, the legal
Yeah,
system, in some way, shape, or form, is going to
yeah,
have to work this out and sort out
yeah,
what are our rules and laws with regard to
yeah,
birds. That is a kind of a foray into the liability issues
yes,
with birds. So what if one bird hits another bird and somebody's at fault and somebody gets severely injured or even killed?
yeah,
What if a bird hits a pedestrian? What if the pedestrian's at fault and walks out in front of the bird? What if the bird's on the sidewalk? What if the bird's on the street? And it's just the analogy, and this has kind of worked itself out through the law, is if a pedestrian goes in front of a bicycle and the pedestrian's at fault and the bicyclist gets hurt, what happens? If the bicyclist runs over a pedestrian in the crosswalk, what happens? We have the same thing
yeah,
regarding birds,
yeah,
and the legal system is actually going to sort that out.
yeah,
So, the great big giant nerd I am, I took my nerd and tried to apply it to bird, and I got out the book with all the insurance policies, and I'm going through all these insurance policies, and insurance policies differ in their definitions. And I think some of this is going to have to work its way through the legal system also. So,
yeah,
let's just take the hypothetical situation. Somebody's riding a bird on the street. They hit a pedestrian in the crosswalk, severely injure the pedestrian, resulting in large medical bills and lost wages. How does the pedestrian get paid for that? On the bird, is that when you're driving a bird, are you covered by your automobile insurance?
right, right,
Well, some automobile policies use the word auto. Some policies use the word motor vehicle. Some used, and this is in different places and different definitions, so I'm taking what would fill this room with books and trying to squeeze it down. But some places it's called a motorized land conveyance. And so all these different terms are used in our auto policies. Does that cover you? I would argue that it's no different than renting a car. Your car insurance covers you when you rent a car. You're renting a motorized bird. I think there's a strong argument that your auto coverage covers you.
yeah,
The flip side is if you have renter's insurance or homeowner's insurance. Now, if you're walking in the crosswalk and I negligently walk and run into you, my homeowner's insurance would step in to pay your medical bills and lost wages. Does that apply with a bird? Well, homeowner's insurance does not cover you in a motor vehicle. Is the bird a motor vehicle or not a motor vehicle? So
this is fascinating.
yeah. So
This is fascinating.
a lot of these definitions
Yeah,
are going to have to work their way through the legal system. Going back to the Institute of Government, they think that a bird will be considered a motor vehicle.
okay,
So now, some municipalities in governmental districts, they have special laws and regulations for segways. You familiar with the segways?
yes, yes,
The little two-wheeled thing that you stand
right,
on? And perhaps that's a template for us going forward
yeah, that would make sense.
with similar sort of
Yeah,
regulations to cover the bird.
yeah,
But we're going to have to sort all this
yeah.
out.
I love that you've kind of gone through this with the nerd hat and
Yeah,
thought through this far ahead. Is very
yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
And here's the
So
thing, David.
well,
Yeah,
in
go ahead.
addition to this, in
Okay.
addition to all that, remember that most of us have either uninsured or underinsured motor vehicle coverage on our vehicle. I am almost positive that if a pedestrian gets hit by a bird and the bird does not have insurance, the uninsured or underinsured coverage, my argument is, and
Yeah,
I think we win on it, that would apply.
yeah,
In fact, all the insurance coverages, that's the one I'm most sure of. These others are going to evolve.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm positive there'll be cases on them, and
I'm sure.
and it's
Yeah,
something we're going to have to sort out as a society.
yeah,
And an interesting thing, and I speak to high school classes a lot,
sure.
and there are three ways to regulate society: by executive order, by the legislative powers of the legislative branch, or by the private legal system.
Hmm.
In this sort of situation, I think you're going to have all three come into play at some level to
Yeah,
help sort out the laws going forward
yeah,
as to how we deal with the birds. And if the birds are successful, there's already another one, Lime. There's the Lime bikes in some cities that are the bikes you can check out and
okay.
then rent. And Lime is now getting into scooters to compete with the birds.
Wow.
And so if birds are successful, there's going to be another one, just like
Yeah,
Uber was successful,
right.
and now there's Lyft.
Yes,
So it's going to happen.
yes.
So the responsibility on us, and I'm by pointing at myself, those of us in the legal system, we need to help usher and guide
Yeah,
this new societal happening in a way that we properly and fairly regulate it. Because
yeah,
obviously there's a lot of positives, just like I saw in Raleigh the other day. And the flip side is there's some dangers and concerns. And then, there's a couple of the ridiculous things like nobody's going to walk around carrying a helmet under their arm.
right.
So we have to sort all that out.
Yeah, yeah. In the short term, what are your recommendations for those that want to take advantage of this
So
opportunity?
So if you're going to use a bird, number
Yeah,
one, use extreme caution. I would say the same thing that I tell people in riding bicycles. You're more exposed, you're more dangerous. Motorists are not used to them yet. I think the areas who have enacted ordinances, the birds are not allowed in the sidewalks.
okay.
They're allowed in the street and in bike lanes.
Hmm.
And so I think you should be using them on the edge of the road, just like you would a bicycle or in a bike lane. Pretend you're invisible, just like on a bike. Motorists are not going to be used to seeing you, and they're not going to expect you to be there. So pretend you're invisible and use extreme caution. Then follow all traffic laws, obey all traffic laws, be very, very careful at crosswalks, be courteous to others, be a good ambassador for the bird.
Yeah,
Uh, for motorists, be aware that they're out there. And it's interesting because when the birds landed, they all landed downtown. The birds are making their way in other places around town also. So, they could show up anywhere.
yeah,
And they're kind of ingenious. They have a headlight and that comes on when you're operating them. And I think they'll go as high as 15 miles an hour with a range of up to 15 miles.
okay.
So, which is may not seem that far, but I think riding a scooter, that's an extraordinary distance.
Yeah,
So yeah,
right.
so that's a
Yeah,
long ways.
very
So
interesting.
I think we all need to be very, very aware.
Yeah,
We all need to be on the lookout. On just like any other issue in society, this isn't something to have a knockdown, drag out fight over who's
yeah,
right, who's wrong. It's something we need to come together on, do the
yeah,
best we can to keep each other safe, and
yes,
and hopefully it's an asset that adds to society. People can have some fun with it.
yeah,
Uh, the one thing we have in town, I think we've got 9 microbreweries now, just in Winston-Salem. There's quite a few microbreweries in Greensboro and in the surrounding areas. Don't come out of the bar
yeah,
and think you jump on your bird and you're safe, because
right.
that's probably a very bad idea.
Yes, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
David, this is really an interesting discussion.
We'll have to provide an update because
Yes, absolutely. It's
yeah,
great.
the birds are evolving as we speak all over the Triad area.
Very interesting. Well, David, if someone wants to reach out to you, how can they do that?
Yeah, the best way, all sorts of resources on our website. We'll probably put a link to a transcript of this live portion on our website at DaggettSchulerLaw.com, and obviously can call us at 336-724-1234.
Very good.
And in the meantime, be careful if you're playing around with birds.
I won't be, but you might.
I might, yes.
Okay.
But remember, I get to choose whether I'm the young guy or the old guy, so I might choose to be the young guy.
Right. Oh, thanks for being with us, David.
Thank you, Cindy. Good to see you.
You too. For those of you watching, leave your comments, leave your questions. David will answer them for you. And thanks again for being with us. Bye, everybody.